Shalom and welcome to Shomer Mitzvot, Torah Observant, a series on practical messianic living and apologetics. I'm the author, Torah Teacher Ariel, ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. Torah observance is a matter of the heart. It always has been and always will be. The Torah proper instructed the people of Israel to love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your resources. This is where Shomer Mitzvot begins, by loving Hashem and accepting Him on His terms. By this, I mean accepting His means of covenant obedience. For today, this means acceptance of Yeshua, His only Son, for Jew and non-Jew alike. Shalom, shalom. You're listening to Live Internet Studies. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman HaNaviy. This is episode number 86. Let's open with a word of prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Lord, we thank you for bringing us together once again to gather and to sit and to study your words of life and to soak in your spirit. We thank you for this responsibility to gather together and to study and to equip ourselves and to build ourselves up in one another and to just praise the name of our Messiah, Yeshua. Bless you, Lord, for all of the wonderful things that you're continuing to do in and through this ministry and this community. I thank you for each and every person who is able to attend these live Skype studies week after week. And I also thank you for the ongoing and growing internet community through the YouTube videos and the iTunes podcasts and the visiting of my website and things like that. Help me, Lord, to continue to look to you and to continue to rely on you as the source and the one who is giving me a reason to continue to fellowship with people from around the world in this particular medium. Protect us, Lord, heal us, continue to keep us safe during these troubling times, and we'll be careful to give you the praise and glory. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining me week after week. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman HaNaviy. I am a Torah teacher at Congregation Kehilat Tenuvah. That's the Harvest Congregation, which is a real-life Messianic congregation in Thornton, Colorado. You can find us online at www.graftedin.com. And from the homepage, you can click around and find information needed to visit our live congregation. If you're ever in the Denver area on a Saturday afternoon, we'd love to have you come and join us and visit our congregation. And since you've got internet access, head on over to my own personal Torah teaching website sometime and look at the information related to our live internet studies. Of course, I have lots of information there available for those of you who are interested in weekly Torah portion studies or Holy Convocation studies, and specialized studies, short questions, short answers to our Observant series, Galatians commentary, Trinity studies, Hebrew studies, Roman studies, things like that. I've got lots of information available to you, but for now, I just want you to be aware that my own website, which is www.tetzetorah.com, which is TETZETORAH.com, has a live internet study. We meet together each Saturday evening from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. For my home site, you can click on the little kind of mustard orange colored banner along the very, very top, or maybe that's a pumpkin colored banner. So click on that banner and scroll down into the live internet studies page, and you'll find all the information needed logistic wise. You'll see the current episode number, the meeting date, and the meeting times. Each hour-long study is broken up into two segments. We've got segment 1, which is 30 minutes, and we will be continuing in our ongoing series, which is Romans 14 Unplugged, Feasts and Fasts and Food, Oh My, Part 7 this week. And then segment 2, for 30 minutes, we'll be exploring the Shema, discussions on the issues of Trinity. We're in paper 2, Yahweh and Yeshua, part 24. And then we've also got a featured YouTube video. Tonight we'll be watching Jeremiah 31:31, New Covenant. And the video is available on my iTunes page, my YouTube channel, if you're ever interested in just viewing all my videos that I post there. If you're interested in joining, just briefly, if you're interested in joining the live internet studies week after week, you're going to need Skype access, and primarily this means you're going to need the Skype link. Once you have the Skype link, which you can get from me, just scroll to the end of any of my web pages at my website and look for the little icon that looks like an envelope. Click that. It will send me an email. Tell me you're interested in joining the live Skype class, and I'd be more than happy to send you the Skype link. But the Skype link itself will gain you access to the live Skype study. You're either going to need a Skype account or Skype app installed on your device, which would be true if you're using a smartphone or a desktop or an iPad type device, tablet. If you have a computer, I think Skype will just let you connect through through your browser, and you don't even need a Skype account to do so. So, love to have you join us. There's an exclusive chat and discussion after the live study that does not get recorded or posted anywhere on the internet, and it's exclusive to those who've joined the Skype study live. So we'd love to have you join us week after week. Let's put a date on tonight's recording. On my side of the world, it's already Sunday, March the 1st, 2020. So 2020, March 1st. But the date of this recording is actually still February 29th, 2020. This is episode number 86. Let's look now at our liturgy real quick. I'm going to be reading two passages. One will be a New Covenant passage out of the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, and the other passage will be the New Covenant corresponding passage, the same quote, out of the book of Hebrews, chapter 8. So we'll read those two because they actually correspond with the featured YouTube video that we're going to be watching tonight. And what I'm going to do for by way of the liturgy is slightly different. Normally I just read the English and then the Hebrew, or the English and then the Greek. But this time I'm bringing up BibleHub.com's True Interlinear, where you can see English on top of Hebrew or something to that effect. And the reason I'm doing that is so that you can see which English words correspond to which Hebrew words and vice versa. And to notice that there are some words that don't always get translated. For instance, the word covenant doesn't get translated in every single verse from our English from the original Greek, even though we might think it should be there. And so that's why I'm doing it this way this time. So let me read down through this liturgy for you real quick. Liturgy is going to be a little bit longer, so just bear with me. All right, so I think what I'll do is I'll go and read the English, and I'm going to read the wooden translation that shows up on the screen for those of you with me in the live class, or those of you who are watching this YouTube video. You can see on your screen right now. The red part is the literal kind of wooden word for word, what we call pony version or interlinear, one language on top of another, which means it's going to be kind of difficult. It won't be natural to our English speaking ears, but that's okay because it's following the literal syntax, that is word order, of each Hebrew word that it represents, or the Greek when we get to that. So let's read Jeremiah 31 verse 31 through verse 34, which is the familiar New Covenant section. And we'll read down through the end of the Hebrew paragraph there, stopping at verse 34. So let me read that English part first, and then I'll go back and read the Hebrew for you as well. Okay. The English, again, this is no true translation. This is just paraphrase. I'm sorry, not paraphrase. It's the exact opposite of that. It's literal translation. The English says, "Behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, and when I will make with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah a covenant new." Verse 32, "Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, which they broke my covenant. And though I was a husband to them, says Yahweh." Verse 33, "But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after days those, says Yahweh. I will put my law in their minds and on their hearts write it, and I will be their God," their God, "and they shall be my people." Verse 34, "And no shall teach more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for all they shall know me, from the least of them and to the greatest of them, says Yahweh. For I will forgive their iniquity and their sin, no, I will remember more." All right, so that's the kind of the wooden word-for-word version. Let's go back up and read the Hebrew of that as well. And those of you who are able to follow along with the Hebrew, you can now see kind of which word matches which Hebrew word matches which English word. Starting right there in the Hebrew with verse 31. The Hebrew says, Hine yamim ba'im ne'um Adonai, v'charati et Beit Yisrael ve'et Beit Yehuda brit chadasha. Verse 32. Lo chabrit asher karati et avotam bayom hecheziki bayadam lahotziam me'eretz Mitzrayim asher hema heferu et briti va'anuchi ba'alti bam ne'um Adonai. Verse 33. Ki zot habrit asher echrot et Beit Yisrael acharei hayamim hahem ne'um Adonai natati et torati bekirbam ba'al libam echtavena v'haiti lachem le'elohim v'hema yiyu li la'am. And then the final verse, verse 34, V'lo yalamdu od ish et re'ehu, v'ish et achaiv lemor, du'u et Adonai, ki kulam yedu, oti lemiktanam, va'ad gudolam ne'um Adonai, ki eslach la'anonam, la'anovam, ul chata'am lo ezkarod. And that will be the Hebrew liturgy for tonight. It's actually a little easier to read Greek than it is Hebrew because there's not a lot of the up and down going on. All the vowel sounds are contained in the letters themselves. There's no extra points. As some of you know, Hebrew does not contain vowels. There's only consonants, and so the vowel sounds are reproduced by the little dots and dashes and symbols that you find up, above, and between the letters and around, which were added later by the scribes. But Greek doesn't contain any such thing, so it's a little easier for my eyes to follow. Okay, let's now read Hebrews chapter 8, and this is going to be a longer read. This is Hebrews chapter 8, verses 7 through the end of the chapter, which is verse 13. So all of those verses we're going to read for our liturgy tonight. You guys ready? All right, buckle in. This will take a little bit longer. Again, we'll read the English first, and then I'll go back and read the Greek. All right, the English says, starting in verse 7, if for the first that had been faultless, not for a second would have been sought a place. Let me pause and show you that right away in verse 7, we don't see any word covenant. And yet he talks about covenant in verse 6. And the word for covenant actually shows up in verse 6, right there, diathekes. So the context is a covenant, right, from starting in verse 6. And when we get to verse 8, we actually do have the word covenant as well. So sandwiched between verse 7 and verse 8 is verse 6, is verse 8. Sandwiched between verse 7 and verse... let's try that again. Sandwiched between verse 6 and 8 is verse 7, and verse 7 doesn't have the word covenant, so he's talking about this new, whatever has been faultless in a second and things like that. But the context is a covenant, but the context is also this agreement that God had with Israel at some level, whether it be the Levitical priestly level or the tribal level or something like that. So that's where we have to let context decide. So let's start over. If for the first, right, not the first covenant, even though your translations probably say first covenant, if for the first that had been faultless, not for a second would have been sought a place. Okay. All right, verse 8, finding fault for with them, he says, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, and I will ratify with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah a covenant new. So yeah, we do have the word covenant there. And then in verse 9, we also have the word covenant. And this, of course, is owing to the fact that the writer's going to quote from the book of Jeremiah that we just read from. Verse 9, not according to the covenant that I made with fathers of them in the day of having taken hold of by me the hand of them to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they not did continue in the covenant of me, and I disregarded them, says the Lord. Verse 10, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after the days, those, says the Lord, putting laws of me into the mind of them, and upon hearts of them I will inscribe them, and I will be to them for God, and they will be to me for a people. Verse 11, and no, not shall they teach each the neighbor of him and each the brother of him, saying, Know the Lord, because all will know me from the least to the greatest of them. Verse 12, because merciful I will be toward the iniquities of them, and the sins of them no not I shall remember more. And then the final verse, verse 13, in saying new, notice again, now he leaves out the word covenant. In saying new, right, every translation, nearly every translation has the word covenant right here afterwards, after the word new, and saying a new covenant. But he doesn't say it in the Greek, even though he just used the word covenant over and over again in the previous verses. Go back and study that sometime. Verse 13, in saying new, he has made obsolete the first, right? He doesn't say covenant there. He just says the first. That then growing old and aging is near vanishing. All right. Okay, let's go back up and read the Greek of those same passages, and I'll try not to stumble over to the Greek as much as I did the Hebrew there earlier. All right, where do we start? In verse 7? Okay. All right, here we go. The Greek says, and for those of you with me, those of you who can see my screen, if you'd like to, if you can't read this Greek right here, try sometime reading this transliterated Greek, which is just above the Greek, right? This says prote, but if you can't read that, look at this, right? If you can try and read that, this says amemptos. If you can't read that, then try reading this word up there, which is kind of nice. If you can read transliterated Greek. All right, here we go. E gar he prote ekine ein amemptos uk an deuteras ezeteto is ezetota ezeteta tapas. Verse 8. Memphamenos gar aratus lege idu hemerai erkantai lege kurias kai sun teleso epiton oikon Israel kai epiton oikon Judah diathekane kainain. That's new covenant. Diathekane kainain, a covenant which is new. Verse 9. U katatain diathekane hein epoiesa tois patrasin auton en himera epilabamenu mu tes keros auton exa gagain autus ek geis aiguptu hati autoi uk enamenan en te diatheke mu kago ema lesa auton lege kurias. Verse 10. Hati haute he diatheke hein diathesamai, to oiko Israel metatas himeras e kenas lege kurias didus namus mu es ten dia noyan auton kai epi cardias auton epigrapso autus kai esamai autois es theon kai autoi esantai moi es laon. Verse 11. Kai u me didaxosin hekastas ton palatin autu kai hekastas ton adelphon autu legon gnothi ton kurion hati pantes e desusin me apa mikru heos megalu auton. Verse 12. Hati helios esamai tais adekiais auton kai ton hamartion auton u me mimnesto eti. Verse 13, the final verse. Into legain kainain pepalaiokin. Pepalaiokin. Tain protein ta de let's try that one again. Palaiumenon, that's a tongue twister right there. Ta de palaiumenon kai geraskan ingus aphanismu. And we'll stop right there with the liturgy. The point again, when you're reading through the Bible, be aware that the translators add extra words for your translation that aren't always there in the Greek, and they have to determine from the context, should I add a word or should I kind of smooth out a wooden, kind of a rough rendering of the Greek. And so it's not wrong to do that. That's the only thing is you're getting the translator's bias, and all translators have bias. And so if you're curious about reading the original Greek and seeing which words are added, well, then you have to use something like the tool I'm showing you right now, which is interlinear. All right, let's turn now. Let me look at my time and see what I'm doing. Okay, let's turn now to the video that I've got prepared for you. We're going to watch this video that's talks about Jeremiah 31:31 and the New Covenant, and then we'll turn to our study, okay? So let's jump to the video. Welcome to A Minute or Two with the Word. I'm your host, Torah Teacher Ariel, where every few days we take a look at a relevant passage of Scripture that I find very fascinating and important for us to consider as Jews and Gentiles in Messiah. Let's talk about Jeremiah 31:31. Let me read the ESV English and then I will read the Masoretic Hebrew text as well, just for fun. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. The Hebrew reads, Hine yamim ba'im na'um Adonai v'charati et Beit Yisrael ve'et Beit Yehuda brit chadasha. The Hebrew term for new covenant is the last two words of this verse, brit chadasha, the same term used by many Messianic Jews and Gentiles for the New Testament part of the Bible. Just what exactly is this new covenant anyway? Well, as the term implies, the new covenant is a contractual agreement that God was promising to someday make with national Israel. The verses immediately following tell the wonderful fact that this agreement would include God writing His Torah on the hearts of His people, and that all would know the Lord from the least of them to the greatest. The arrangement also speaks of the miraculous fact that God would forgive their iniquity on a national level and remember their sin no more. But my challenge to you today is twofold. One, is this new covenant for national Israel only? How can the surrounding Gentile nations join in on these gracious promises from the Lord? And two, is this new covenant something that truly awaits a yet future fulfillment? Well, the short answers are one, yes, this is an exclusive agreement with national Israel, but Gentile believers can actually join in the new covenant by trusting in the Messiah of Israel, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. This makes them into genuine children of Abraham at the remnant Israel level. And two, no, the new covenant is not a promise that is time-bound per se. Yes, Israel will have to wait to experience salvation on a national level, but individual Jews and Gentiles have been becoming new covenant members since the time of Adam. And this is because Yeshua is the exclusive mediator of this new covenant. To be sure, He Himself said it best, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Okay, I trust you enjoyed the video, those of you with me in the live class and those of you who are watching the video by way of YouTube. Let's turn now to the study at Romans 14. We are in this paragraph where we're going to be discussing the identity of the weak in faith, those in Romans chapter 14 that are mentioned right at the very beginning. Last week we took a quote from Dr. Moo, let's see, his name is Douglas J. Moo, and he's an esteemed author and professor of theology in Christian circles, and he's no small voice when it comes to conveying the thoughts of traditional Christianity. He's very well respected, very intelligent. However, he represents what I consider to be basically the traditional Christian perspective of who the weak are in this particular passage. And we looked at that last week, and he says it right. Let's see. He says it right here. The weak were those mainly Jewish Christians who could not bring themselves to abandon the requirements of the law they had observed all their lives. They could not, as Christians, simply ignore the food laws, Sabbath observance, and so on. The strong, by contrast, felt no need to observe these laws. So this is the traditional perspective of the identity of who the weak are in Romans chapter 14. And the reason it bears relevance for us today is because, obviously, if the weak are Christians who are still holding on to Torah, and if Paul is admonishing the weak to actually grow in their strength, there's kind of the unspoken understanding in this passage that the weak should grow up and matriculate and let their faith grow, then we have essentially Paul admonishing everyone in this passage to come to the place where they are strong in their faith, which would resemble an absence of what we're describing as requirements of the law or a food law, Sabbath laws. In other words, it would seem to be that Paul, being one of the strong, even though he's a Jewish Christian, has nevertheless also abandoned his connection to requirements of the law. Paul himself no longer felt this compunction to obey the Sabbath and keep kosher and things like that. And since he is one of the strong, he can also admonish the other strong to continue in this type of lifestyle, and then also to kind of put up with the failings of the weak as they work their way from that position of being weak and connected to the law, as they kind of grow in their faith over the weeks and months and years as they're members of the congregation, to a place where they too can feel free to worship however they wish, not feeling restricted by the boundaries of the Mosaic law and things like that. All right, so having said all that, let's turn now to a difference of opinion. Let's look at defining the weak in faith from a messianic perspective. What I mean by that is, let's bring to the table of this discussion a perspective or an interpretation that does not actually agree with the traditional Christian perspective. And this will begin to move us into the perspective that I myself personally hold. But let's first look at the perspective from Dr. David Stern, which is a very popular perspective because it's readily available in not only your complete Jewish Bible, study Bibles, or your Jewish New Testament commentaries that many Messianic Jews and Gentiles own, but it's also available anywhere on the internet and things like that. So Dr. Stern is a Messianic Jew, and it's no secret that as a Christian, as a Messianic Jew, he holds to a position that for the most part is pro-Torah. It's Torah positive. His lifestyle is reflective of a believer in Messiah who still holds a pro-Torah perspective. He believes that the Torah is still relevant for us as Christians, particularly Jewish Christians, and also to some degree available and relevant to Christian Gentiles. So let's read what Stern has to say. Starting right here in this particular paragraph, we'll work our way down through this one and probably this one and these two, right? We'll read this paragraph and then we'll read Stern's sentiments, and then we'll probably stop for tonight. All right, we're starting right here. As with Lloyd Jones, I'm going to reserve agreeing with Moo, as it seems to simply share the popular views on a Christian relationship to the law and its supposed freedom from having any obligation to keeping those ceremonial aspects of it for Gentile Christians, a view that, in my estimation, finds no sustainable support from the Tanakh, the Apostolic Scriptures, or the Bible as a whole. So understand what I'm trying to say right up front. I respect Dr. Moo. I respect Professor Moo. I respect his opinion as a traditional Christian. But as a Messianic Jew who has studied the Bible as a Jew, as someone who embraces Messiah, I don't find an interpretation which leads to an application that teaches that the law is done away with and it's no longer relevant for Gentile Christians, and this would include Jewish Christians. I don't find this position that the law is done away with and that we no longer need to keep it as a church or as Christians. I don't find this view being taught either in the Tanakh, which would be Israel's scriptures in Paul's day, or the Apostolic Scriptures which were being written in Paul's day, or what we would today call the Bible as a whole. Understand my position there. Let's continue. Thus, having just represented two mainstream Christian perspectives, let us examine a few of the opposing opinions that usually come from the Messianic side of this mini-debate. Messianic Jewish author David H. Stern takes pointed differences with the historic Christian assertion that the weak were Messianic Jews still clinging to their heritage religion after coming to faith in Messiah Yeshua. Writing in his Jewish New Testament commentary, he articulates a very valuable context of Romans 14 along with his own understanding of the identity of the weak and the strong thusly. So let's read Dr. Stern's notes, as is available for anyone who owns the complete Jewish Bible or commentary, the complete Jewish Bible and the Jewish New Testament commentary, all right? So let's read down to Dr. Stern's notes, okay? In 14:1 through 15:6, here are some notes that he references. Among believers, there are two groups, those with strong trust and those with weak trust. Stern says, the latter are depicted in this passage as feeling they must abstain from meat or wine and or observe certain days as holy, while the former feel no such compunctions. Stern continues, on the basis of this passage, Messianic Jews are sometimes asked by Gentile Christians to stop observing Jewish holidays or keeping kosher. right? Let me just pause. This is the traditional sentiment of many in the Christian church who, upon encountering a Messianic Jew such as myself, who continues to keep the Torah, which would include special days like Sabbath, festivals, and keeping kosher, they typically want to inform me that why would you want to keep doing that stuff when all of that's been either done away with in Messiah, it's been relaxed in Messiah, it's been fulfilled by Jesus, we're no longer under the law, we're under grace. The Torah ran its course, it was added until, like we read in the book of Galatians and things like that. So the law has come to an end, like we read Romans chapter 10. Jesus brought the law to an end, things like that. So they really are trying to inform me in all love, in all respect, and in all consideration for my well-being. They typically try to let me know that this is something that I don't need to do anymore. Or we Messianic Jews are criticized as having weak faith if we adhere to Jewish practices. I put first person there, but Stern says they. He goes on to say, starting right here, but the specifics of the passage are clearly in a Gentile cultural and religious context, not a Jewish one. Stern says that it does not teach that following Jewish practices is a sign of weak faith. So there's his first challenge to the traditional Christian perspective that keeping the Torah is a sign of weak faith. Notice that this is the traditional Christian perspective, that keeping amounts of Torah such as special days and food laws equals a sign that your faith is weak, whether you be Jewish or Gentile. But according to the traditional Christian understanding of Paul's writing in Romans 14, the weakness of your faith is characterized by a continued reliance upon Torah obedience. But Stern challenges that perspective as a Messianic Jew. He says it doesn't teach that following Jewish practice is a sign of weak faith. Rather, he says, it exhorts, speaking of the passage, it exhorts believers, Jewish or Gentile, whose trust is strong, not to look down on those whose trust they consider weak, precisely the opposite of the behavior described. So Stern is focusing on the idea of the judgmental attitude that the strong and the weak might have towards one another based on their personal opinions to rather either keep Torah or to not keep Torah, something to that effect. All right, so here's what Stern has to say. Who does he say the weak are? Well, let's just read it. The weak are believers. Now let me stop. He says that the weak are believers. I disagree with him, and we'll find out my perspective a little later on. But for now, let me just tell you that I disagree with him. The weak are believers, either Jewish or Gentile, who have not yet grown sufficiently in their faith to have given up attachment to various ascetic practices and calendar observances. He says the weak are these believers who are still attached to ascetic practices and calendar observances, not necessarily Torah observance. But let's keep reading. They're tied to these activities, however, is not supported by a rational, though mistaken identity as with the legalists, either Jewish or Gentile or Jewish believers, either Judaizers or others, some other stripe, or who believe they earn a righteous status before God by their works. Rather, speaking of the weak believers, it is irrational and emotional, linked to psychological needs, social pressure, or superstition, or it may simply be a matter of habit. He's still describing the weak believers. When their activities in these areas are questioned in, quote, arguments over opinions, in quote, as we read in verse 1, they are not, quote, fully convinced in their own minds, verse 5, nor, quote, free of self-doubt, in quote, verse 22, but rather they easily, quote, upset, in quote, or even destroyed, quote unquote, verse 15, and thus are able to, quote, fall away, in quote, or stumble, quote unquote, as in verse 20 through 21. What he's trying to say is that this is why Sha'ul calls them weak, right? Paul calls these people weak because of all of the descriptions that are given in this particular part of Paul's letter. And Stern goes on to say, in any case, it is clear from the passage itself that the weak cannot be equated with observant Messianic Jews. For, Stern notes, nothing in Judaism requires a Jew to be a vegetarian, as in verse 2. And it is argued that kosher food might not have been available, which would force a Messianic Jew to turn to a form of vegetarianism. That would be true. But Stern notes that Rome had a large Jewish colony, read Acts 28:17. Even though the Jews had been exiled from Rome, they had been returning to Rome in numbers, so much so that they could be considered, even though they were a minority, they were still considered an important part of the communities that Paul would have written to and recognized. Stern goes on to say, it is unthinkable that it would have not had that Rome would not have had a shochet, which is a ritual slaughterer. It is argued that the shochet might have been unwilling to sell to Messianic Jews. Again, another pushback to Stern's position. But Stern notices that, or maintains that this is a gratuitous assumption for which there is no evidence, and the willingness of the Jewish leaders of Rome to come and listen to Sha'ul, per Acts 28:17 and following, argues against it, right? So what Stern is simply trying to recognize is that throughout the letters that we read from Paul, particularly as we correlate the information in Paul's letters with what we can read about in the book of Acts, we find that the communities that Paul visited, to include Rome, would have had large enough Jewish presences and large enough Jewish colonies that it was not that there was a lack of Jewish authorities where Jewish people would have been able to have access to resources such as kosher food and things like that. That's all he's trying to highlight. He closes by saying, also, nothing in Judaism requires a Jew to refrain from wine, as in verse 21. The only exceptions are Nazarites during the period of their vow and Kohanim on duty. On the contrary, wine drinking is so much a part of Jewish ritual that it has lent an aura of sanctity, which is, at least until recently, made alcoholism very uncommon among Jews. All right, and he closes by saying, for these many reasons, we conclude that the weak, in Romans 14 here, this is Stern's opinion, cannot be Messianic Jews who are, quote, not yet free from the law, end quote. Now, again, I agree with his overall assessment that the weak cannot be Messianic Jews, but I disagree with his assessment that the weak must be believers. So, we'll flesh out who I think the weak are in this passage a little later on, but for now, Stern's commentary was lifted, or the quote that I lifted here was from footnote number 10, shows David Stern, Jewish New Testament Commentary, Jewish New Testament Publications, JNTC, 1992, page 432 and 33. Okay, and with that, I think we'll make a break for segment 1 for our study tonight. So that concludes segment 1 on the Romans 14 study. Let me look at my time and see what I'm doing. I think I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, all right. Let's turn now to segment 2 of my study, Exploring the Shema, Discussions on the Issues of Trinity. We are in paper 2, Yahweh and Yeshua, and we're in this section entitled, Is Yeshua God? An Appeal to Mystery. Last week, we began by examining the viewpoint of a gentleman by the name of Dr. James Anderson. He's a Christian, and he offers an approach to disambiguating Trinity, or understanding Trinity. He offers an opinion to articulating the concept of Trinity through the lens of the verbiage or nomenclature known as mystery that most of us are so familiar with. That is, when questioned, we as Trinitarian Christians, when we're questioned by Unitarian Christians as to how can God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit all be one being and yet three persons and things like that, it's not uncommon to hear a Trinitarian respond by simply saying, the reason God can be described this way is because it's a mystery. You can't put your finger on it, but this is the way the Bible describes it. And because the Bible doesn't give us all of the terminology, our creeds fill in missing terminology. But Dr. James Anderson simply says, well, wait a minute. We don't need to really fill in for the Bible where terms are missing. Instead, what we can do is simply recognize that we have what appear to be contradictions, but they're not contradictions. They're simply there because of the lack of information. But that doesn't mean that the picture itself is incomplete or that the picture itself is lacking. It's that simply God did not disclose all of the information that would satisfy our modern inquiry into this particular subject. So it's that kind of concept where he's introducing this acronym known as MACRUE, M-A-C-R-U-E. And this stands for, and then we read this first paragraph last week, but basically he says that MACRUE stands for, let me find it here, starting here, MACRUE is merely an apparent contradiction resulting from unarticulated equivocation. So M is merely, A is apparent, C is contradiction, R is resulting, U is unarticulated, and E is equivocation, thus makru. So what he's simply saying is we don't have enough language that exists in the scriptural tradition that we have received to satisfy the analytical, philosophical, ontological puzzle approach. He calls these people who try to solve the mystery of the Trinity using their only logic and formal identity theory and things like that. He calls these people puzzlers. In other words, a Trinitarian such as Dr. Anderson would label Dr. Dale Tuggy, who is a known Unitarian. Dr. Anderson would consider Dr. Tuggy a puzzler. Someone who's trying to view the Bible as a puzzle that needs to be solved from a logical thought process. And Dr. Anderson is trying to challenge that type of approach. He's trying to say the puzzle approach is going to fail at some level. Instead, let's take the Mysterian approach. So that's what we're looking at. So let's read through this particular paragraph here, which is the second half of Dr. Anderson's thought process about his proprietary language, makru. So let's pick this up right here. Dr. Anderson states, according to my proposal, paradoxical formulations of the doctrine of the Trinity must involve an unarticulated equivocation on one or more of the terms employed, such as God is divine, distinct, one, three, and so forth, depending on the particular formulation in view. Do you guys understand what I'm trying to say here? Dr. Anderson, as a Trinitarian Christian, is simply trying to say that there are various terms in the Bible that we encounter when we're reading through the text. God is divine, distinct, one, three, things like that we can translate from the Greek over into English or such. And when we look at these words and we try to determine what these words mean within the surrounding context, right? Jesus says, "I and the Father are one," right? So we've got this the verb, the be verb, right? I and the Father are one. We are one, literally in the Greek. I and the Father are one. What does Jesus mean? Does he mean one in being, or does he mean one in person? As a Trinitarian, I believe that he can mean one in being, but he doesn't mean one in person. Because if Jesus and the Father, I and the Father, are one person, well, then we destroy the force of the three persons of the one nature of God. We have God, one God in three persons. That's what traditional Orthodox Christianity believes in. One being known as God, three persons known as God, or as Dr. James White is fond of saying, one what and three whos. But if we simply collapse the term Jesus, God the Son, into the same term as God the Father, so God the Father and God the Son become the same person, well, then we destroy the persons, right? We erase the distinctives between Father and Son and the distinctions between the person of Jesus and the person of the Father. So we have to look at this equivocal term, I and the Father are one. What does he mean one? What does he mean are, right? That's what Dr. Anderson is trying to alert us to, the fact that we've got what we call unarticulated equivocation, simply meaning Yeshua didn't elaborate enough on what he means by that term for us to say that it is definitely one thing or definitely the other. And so that's really what Dr. Anderson is trying to alert us to, this reality, this unarticulated equivocation. So let's continue with Dr. Anderson. This being the case, right, that the Bible simply doesn't always give us all the articulation that we would like it to have, so that we can definitely say, oh yeah, he's the same being as the Father. Well, where does it say that? Oh, God is actually broken up into three different persons. Well, where does it say that? That type of thing. That being the case, it follows that a formally consistent expression of Trinitarian doctrine can be constructed simply by explicitly articulating distinctions between the relevant terms, that is, distinguishing is version 1 and is version 2, say, or divine version 1 and divine version 2. What he's trying to say is that God's divinity and Jesus' divinity can both be divinity, but we have two different versions that we need to recognize. For instance, the divinity of God, when we're talking about God being God, the Father being God, the divinity of the Father, his version of divinity entails not having corporeality. That is to say, he doesn't have flesh. God is a spirit. And so the Father is a spirit, and this spirit is God. Yet when we compare the version of the deity of God to the version of the deity of the Son, then we have to recognize that Jesus is full deity, but his deity entails dual nature. He has a divine nature as well as a human nature. God the Father does not have a human nature. God the Father has an exclusively spiritual nature. God the Father does not have dual natures. He's not a hypostatic union in and of himself. The Father, as we understand it, is fully spirit. But Jesus the Son of God, who is fully God, has this dual nature, right? Fully human and fully divine. So the version of deity that we describe Jesus using that terminology is what we would have to recognize as a deity one or deity two. This doesn't mean it's two separate deities, but it does mean it's two separate persons within the one deity that we describe as God. So it's the articulation of the disambiguated terms, version one, version two, divine version one, divine version two, and things like that, that help us to later understand that we're discussing one being who is complex in his nature, so much so that even though the Bible doesn't always articulate that complexity, nevertheless, we later Christians find the need to express that so that we can then have a formally consistent expression of our Trinitarian doctrine. Dr. Anderson continues, alternatively, problematic terms can be appropriately qualified so as to eliminate formal inconsistency. For example, now listen up very, very closely, because this is going to help you in dialoguing with your Christian friends who don't hold to the Trinitarian position, who think that the Bible itself is psychobabble when it comes to explaining the nature of God, and they base their position on not understanding the fact that they are perhaps being trapped by a puzzle approach to the Bible. They think that the Bible should make sense from a logical perspective at all times, and I'm trying to tell you that it doesn't always have to make sense from a logical perspective. Although it contains logical consistency, it sometimes strikes us as logically inconsistent if we are trying to fit God into our own analytic mold. So Dr. Anderson challenges by giving us this particular example of qualifying the eliminating formal inconsistency. Listen to this example. For example, Anderson says, the term one, quote unquote, right, I and my Father are one. The term one can be redefined to accommodate the enumerative oddities raised by the metaphysics of divine personhood, right? Jesus is one, but he's one person, while still applying in the usual way to non-divine persons and other mundane entities. So we've got one God who's made up of three persons, and Jesus is one of those persons. So I and the Father are one. We could understand this to mean Jesus belongs to the being known as the one God, and yet Jesus is one of the persons of that one being known as God. So we have to understand the equivocal nature of this phrase one. It can be redefined. It accommodates the enumerative oddities raised by the metaphysics. Remember, we talked about metaphysics last week, right? It's this idea of, it's a branch of philosophy, as I click on my definition, that deals with the first principles of things, right? How is God made up? This is kind of bleeding into ontology, but what is the nature of God's construction? The first principle of things, including abstract concepts, right? We're dealing with the nature of God. That's kind of an abstract construct in some cases, such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. So that's what I mean by metaphysics. So Anderson concludes, whatever route is taken, right, when we're trying to disambiguate the concepts of Trinity as found in the Bible, whatever route is taken, however, the essential point is this. Listen up. Given that we are dealing with a makru, right, given the fact that we're dealing with merely an apparent contradiction resulting from unarticulated equivocation, and plain language, we're dealing with a lack of verbiage in the Bible that would satisfy our logical curiosity. Given that truth, the vocabulary used to express the doctrine of the Trinity can in principle be adapted so as to eliminate any formal contradiction. And that's the challenge that we can use. In other words, Dr. Anderson is saying that we can have a well-meaning dialogue with people such as Dr. Dale Tuggy, who is a known biblical Unitarian, but he's also a known philosopher and analytic theologian who takes a puzzled approach to trying to figure out how God ticks. We can have dialogues with people at that level as long as we understand that they, the Unitarians, and I'm closing with this, the Unitarians, more often than not, are trapped by their own limited understanding of the terminology that's on the table for them to utilize. In the end, the reason I take the biblical monotheistic Trinitarian approach is not because there aren't verses that could be taken either way. There are verses that perhaps could go either way, Unitarian versus Trinitarian, based on the ambiguous, what we call equivocal nature of some of the terminology of the passages and the lack of articulated information found within the context. That's not why I take the Trinitarian position. I take the Trinitarian position that I do because if we take all of the valuable data that is available to us from Genesis all the way through Revelation and put it on the table for examination, in the end of the day, this is the conviction that I come to based on the information that is available to me as a Bible student. And I think that the Bible is clear in that regards, that there are some places that are simply unambiguous where we can't take it a different way. The terminology, the context doesn't lend to a different understanding. But there are some minority verses that do, and so I can understand why people have their doubts. People like to cherry pick when it comes to verses that are ambiguous and contain equivocation, and it's the cherry picking and focusing on those minority verses that causes people to sometimes formulate an opinion that, in my perspective, is not well balanced. Okay, so having said all that, let's close our study down. Let me look at my time. I'm doing pretty good. I went just a little bit over, but otherwise I think I did pretty good. We'll turn next week to continuing looking at this idea of the Mysterian approach, and how we can appeal to mystery. Again, it's not the only approach that we can take when trying to understand this logical problem of the Trinity. That is, how can one God be three? How can three be one? How do they fit together? It's not the only approach we can take, and in the end, it's probably not even the approach that we should put all of our eggs into that same basket known as Mysterian. However, it is a very well-founded approach to articulating Trinity, and so it's not wrong to rely on it as a Trinitarian. It's not wrong to use this particular card when you're trying to have a discussion with someone who's a non-Trinitarian. It's not wrong to use the Mysterian card, but as I mentioned, it's not the only approach. To be sure, as we keep reading down through my study, we're going to appeal to another approach known as history before finally simply turning to the appeal to passages about the Bible itself, where we simply take data that is either mysterious or not mysterious, and we kind of put it all together on one table. Okay, so let's close in prayer. Abba, I bless your name and thank you for the opportunity to study right along with the other Bible students in this particular topic. I thank you for the topics that we covered in our hour-long study tonight, the Romans 14 passage where we're trying to identify the discussions of the identities of the weak and the strong so that we can come to an application in our modern 21st century communities and relate to one another, whether we find ourselves in the position of being weak or strong. How can we relate with one another and build one another up in love? And then likewise in the second half of our hour-long study tonight, where we continue to look at this mysterious topic of the one God who is three persons, or whether or not he even is three persons. Lord, how can we understand this better? Thank you for allowing us to continue to pour through the material and pour through the study as those who are sincerely seeking your face, knowing with a full assurance, Lord, that you have called us out of darkness and into your marvelous light, and that you're growing us up into this person of faith that is pleasing to you, filled with your Spirit, and filled with the knowledge of you. And we declare this truth, Lord, unashamedly. And it is on those truths that we will continue to base our faith and to rely on you, Lord. Continue to protect us from all of the evils around us and all of the diseases around us as we continue to read day after day of the disturbing news of all of these diseases and things like that, Lord. We look to you. You are the one who protects us, and you are our healer. We'll be careful, Lord, to give you the praise and glory, B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.
That concludes our show for today. It is my desire that this continuing series of teachings will assist the average non-Jewish believer or new Messianic Jewish believer in his desire to become a more mature child of God. And now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good. To the Lord your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth, and everything in it. Yet the Lord set his affection on your forefathers and loved them. And he chose you, their descendants, above all the nations, as it is today. Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer. Because the Torah is written on the hearts of all who truly name the name of Yeshua as Lord and Savior, it is meant to be followed to the best of our ability. We have no reason for fear of condemnation or the trappings of legalism. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman HaNaviy. The intro and outro song were written, produced, and performed by Ryan Kingsley. For more information on contacting Ryan, you can reach me by email at Yeshua613@hotmail.com. That's YESHUA number 613@hotmail.com. Or visit our website at graftedin.com. That's graftedin.com.